He thought he couldn't be touched until a native girl reached for his hand without hesitation. The blood on his hands never seemed to wash away completely. Jack Morrison stood at the edge of Copper Creek, watching muddy water flow past weathered rocks. His leather gloves, worn thin from years of riding, concealed more than calluses. The town of Redemption sprawled behind him, a collection of sun-bleached wood and broken dreams nestled between towering mesas. Dust devils danced across the main street, stirring up memories he preferred buried. The saloon's piano echoed faintly, a melancholy tune that matched his mood. Jack had arrived 3 weeks ago with nothing but his horse, his guns, and a reputation that preceded him like storm clouds. The locals whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. They spoke of Denver, of what happened there, of why a man like him would seek refuge in a place like this. He pulled his hat lower, shielding his eyes from the relentless sun. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a vast expanse of sagebrush and silence. This was supposed to be his sanctuary, his chance to disappear into anonymity. But even here, in this forgotten corner of the territory, he felt exposed. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made him turn. Sheriff Coleman rode up slowly, his weathered face etched with concern. The old lawman had been watching Jack carefully since his arrival, maintaining respectful distance but never letting him completely out of sight. "Trouble brewing at the reservation," Coleman said, dismounting with careful movements of a man who had spent too many years in the saddle. "Apache delegation coming through tomorrow. Tensions are high." Jack nodded, understanding the implications. The delicate peace between the town and the nearby reservation hung by the thinnest of threads. Any incident could ignite violence that would consume everything in its path. "They're bringing their medicine woman," Coleman continued, studying Jack's reaction. "Young one, name's Ayana. Means eternal blossom or some such. Her grandfather was the one who negotiated the current treaty." The name meant nothing to Jack, but he sensed there was more to this conversation than simple information sharing. Coleman wasn't the type to make idle chat, especially with someone of Jack's reputation. "Why are you telling me this?" Coleman spat into the dust. "Because trouble has a way of finding men like you. And when it does, innocent people get caught in the crossfire." The sheriff remounted and rode away, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts and the persistent feeling that his carefully constructed isolation was about to crumble. That evening, Jack sat in the back corner of the Silver Dollar Saloon, nursing a whiskey and watching the locals through cigarette smoke haze. Conversations were subdued, punctuated by nervous glances toward the reservation road. Fear hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. Martha, the saloon keeper, approached his table with practiced caution. She had learned to read the dangerous men who drifted through her establishment, and Jack Morrison was more dangerous than most. "Another?" she asked, gesturing to his empty glass. "Thanks." She poured amber liquid with steady hands, but Jack noticed the slight tremor in her voice when she spoke. "Word is the Apache girl is coming to town tomorrow. Some say she's got healing powers." Jack didn't respond, but Martha continued anyway. "My daughter took ill last winter, fever that wouldn't break. Doc Henderson tried everything, but she kept getting worse. Then this Apache woman came through, just passing by, mind you. Took one look at my girl and knew exactly what was wrong." She paused, studying Jack's impassive face. "Laid her hands on my daughter's forehead and spoke in their language. By morning, the fever was gone. Been healthy ever since." Jack took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Interesting." Martha leaned closer, lowering her voice. "She never asked for payment. Wouldn't even accept food for the road. Just smiled and moved on. Some folks say she can see things others can't." The saloon doors swung open, and a group of ranch hands entered, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Their leader, a bull of a man named Curtis Wade, surveyed the room with predatory eyes before settling on Jack's table. Wade had been testing boundaries since Jack's arrival, probing for weaknesses like a wolf circling wounded prey. He owned the largest spread in the area and wasn't accustomed to sharing his territory with men who might challenge his authority. "Well, well," Wade said loudly enough for the entire saloon to hear, "if it isn't our mysterious friend." "Still keeping to yourself, Morrison?" Jack didn't look up from his drink. The room had gone quiet, anticipating confrontation like spectators at a prize fight. "Heard you were quite the shooter back in Denver," Wade continued, his tone casual but loaded with menace. "Some say you could draw faster than lightning, kill a man before he even knew he was dying." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Jack's hand remained steady as he lifted his glass, but everyone in the room could feel the tension coiling like a rattlesnake preparing to strike. "That was a long time ago," Jack said quietly. Wade laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "Time doesn't change what a man is, Morrison. A killer stays a killer, no matter how far he runs." The accusation hit its mark, but Jack's expression never changed. He had heard worse, endured more pointed attacks on his character, but there was something in Wade's tone that suggested this was more than idle provocation. "You got something to say to me, Wade, then say it." Wade's hand moved closer to his gun. "I'm saying maybe it's time for you to move on. This town doesn't need your kind of trouble." The standoff stretched like taffy, each second expanding into eternity. Jack could feel the familiar coldness settling over him, the mental preparation that preceded violence. His fingers flexed almost imperceptibly. Then the saloon doors opened again, and Sheriff Coleman entered with purposeful strides. His timing was either coincidental or perfectly calculated. "Wade," Coleman said firmly, "your boys are causing problems at the livery. Might want to see to them." The interruption broke the spell. Wade backed down reluctantly, his eyes never leaving Jack's face. "This isn't over, Morrison." After Wade and his men left, Coleman approached Jack's table. "Appreciate you not killing him. Night's still young." Coleman almost smiled. "That Apache delegation I mentioned? They're arriving earlier than expected. Sunrise." Jack finished his drink and stood. "Good to know." He walked out into the cool night air, his spurs ringing against the wooden sidewalk. The stars were brilliant above the desert, unpolluted by city lights. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack. Jack made his way to the small boarding house where he had taken a room. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly proprietor, was waiting on the front porch with her knitting. "Mr. Morrison," she said without looking up, "might I have a word?" He paused at the bottom of the steps. Mrs. Patterson had treated him with unfailing courtesy since his arrival, never asking questions or making judgments. Her sudden formality was concerning. "My late husband fought in the war," she began, her needles clicking rhythmically. "Came home changed, haunted by things he could never speak about. I learned to recognize that look in a man's eyes." Jack waited, sensing she had more to say. "Whatever happened in Denver, whatever you're running from, it doesn't define who you are now. Sometimes a man needs to be reminded of that." She looked up at him then, her eyes kind but penetrating. "The Apache girl arriving tomorrow, she has a gift for seeing past the surface of things. Don't be surprised if she sees something in you that you've forgotten was there." Jack touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Good night, Mrs. Patterson." He climbed the stairs to his room, but sleep eluded him. Instead, he sat by the window, cleaning his guns with mechanical precision while his mind wandered down paths he usually kept barricaded. Denver. The name alone was enough to summon ghosts. He had been a different man then, or thought he was. Working as a hired gun for wealthy cattlemen who needed problems eliminated discreetly. The pay was good, the work straightforward, and his conscience had long since been silenced by necessity. Then came that final job. A family of homesteaders who had refused to sell their land to the railroad. Simple intimidation, they had told him. Make them see a reason. But the homesteader, Thomas Grant, had been former cavalry. He hadn't intimidated easily, and when he reached for his rifle, Jack had reacted instinctively. The man had died instantly, but his wife's scream still echoed in Jack's nightmares. She had cradled her husband's body while their young daughter watched from the doorway, her eyes wide with terror and incomprehension. Jack had left Denver that night, abandoning his reputation and his old life, but the guilt had followed him like his own shadow, inescapable and ever-present. He reassembled his pistol and holstered it, then lay down on the narrow bed fully clothed. Tomorrow would bring new complications, new tests of his resolve to remain invisible. The Apache delegation would arrive with the sun, led by their medicine woman, a young healer who supposedly possessed mystical abilities. Jack had seen too much of the world to believe in such things, but he respected the power of faith even when he couldn't share it. Sleep finally claimed him in the early hours before dawn, filled with dreams of blood and forgiveness. Jack woke to the sound of horses in the street below. The sun was just cresting the eastern mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. He moved to the window and saw them arriving. The Apache delegation was smaller than expected, perhaps a dozen riders moving with the fluid grace of people born to the saddle. They wore traditional dress mixed with practical trail gear, a visual reminder of the complex balance they maintained between two worlds. At their center rode a young woman who could only be Ayanna. Even from a distance, Jack could see she possessed an unusual presence, a quality that seemed to draw light toward her. Her long black hair was adorned with feathers and beads, and she sat her horse with natural authority. The delegation made its way to the town square, where Sheriff Coleman and several other officials waited to greet them. Jack watched the formal exchanges, the careful diplomacy required to maintain peace between cultures that had been at war for generations. Ayanna dismounted with fluid grace and approached Coleman. Even at this distance, Jack could see the respect in the sheriff's bearing as he spoke with her. Whatever her age, she commanded attention through sheer force of personality. The delegation was escorted to the church, which had been designated as neutral ground for their visit. Jack knew he should stay away, maintain his policy of avoiding attention. But something about the young woman intrigued him. He dressed carefully, checking his weapons out of habit, and made his way downstairs. Mrs. Patterson was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for her boarders. "The Apache delegation has arrived," she said, without looking up from her cooking. "Beautiful young woman leading them. They say she can heal with just a touch." Jack accepted a cup of coffee, inhaling its rich aroma. "You believe that?" Mrs. Patterson considered the question seriously. "I've lived long enough to know there are mysteries in this world beyond our understanding. Whether it's divine gift or natural talent, does it really matter if it helps people?" She placed a plate of eggs and bacon before him. "Mr. Hendricks from the general store cut his hand badly yesterday on some broken glass. Doc Henderson stitched it up, but it's not healing right. Getting infected, by the look of it. He's planning to ask the Apache girl for help." Jack ate in thoughtful silence, then ventured out into the morning heat. The town was more active than usual, with residents finding excuses to pass by the church where the delegation had established itself. He decided to check on his horse at the livery stable, a routine task that would take him near the church without appearing deliberately curious. But as he approached the stable, he heard raised voices from the direction of the square. Curtis Wade stood outside the church with several of his men, gesticulating angrily at Sheriff Coleman. Their voices carried clearly in the still air. "This is madness, Coleman," Wade was saying. "We let these savages into our town, and next thing you know, they'll think they own the place." "The treaty guarantees them safe passage," Coleman replied calmly. "They're here on legitimate business." "Business?" Wade laughed harshly. "What business could they have except scouting for weaknesses? Planning their next raid?" Jack noticed how the townspeople were beginning to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface were now boiling over. "Mr. Wade," a clear voice said from the church steps, "I believe you misunderstand our purpose here." Ayanna emerged from the shadows, moving with serene confidence. Up close, she was even more striking than Jack had realized. Her features were delicate but strong, her dark eyes intelligent and compassionate. She couldn't have been more than 20, yet she carried herself with the dignity of someone much older. Wade turned to face her, his expression ugly with prejudice. "I don't need lectures from some heathen witch doctor." The insult hung in the air like a slap. Several Apache warriors stepped forward, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. The townspeople shifted nervously, sensing how quickly the situation could explode into violence. But Ayanna raised a hand, and her people stopped immediately. Her authority over them was absolute, based on respect rather than fear. "I am here to heal, Mr. Wade," she said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." Wade spat in the dust at her feet. "We don't need your kind of healing. Got our own doctor." "Indeed you do," Ayanna agreed. "Dr. Henderson is a skilled physician. But sometimes healing requires more than medicine." She gestured toward Hendricks, the storekeeper, who stood at the edge of the crowd with his bandaged hand held protectively against his chest. "Your hand pains you," she said gently. "The infection spreads despite the doctor's care." Hendricks looked surprised that she knew about his injury. He glanced nervously between Wade and the Apache woman, caught between fear of confrontation and hope for relief from his suffering. "The choice is yours," Ayanna continued. "I offer help freely, with no obligation or expectation." Wade stepped between them, his hand resting on his gun butt. "Nobody asked for your help, Savage." The word was delivered with deliberate cruelty, designed to provoke. Jack felt his own anger rising, though he couldn't explain why. There was something about the young woman's quiet dignity that made Wade's hostility seem particularly vile. "That's enough, Wade," Sheriff Coleman said firmly. "These people are under my protection while they're in town." "Your protection doesn't mean much if trouble starts," Wade shot back. "And I'm saying trouble is exactly what we'll get if we trust these people." Jack found himself stepping forward before he consciously decided to intervene. His movement was slight, almost casual, but it brought him into Wade's line of sight. "Problem here?" Jack asked quietly. Wade's eyes narrowed as he recognized a potential threat. "This doesn't concern you, Morrison." "Maybe not," Jack agreed, "but the lady seems peaceful enough. Might be wise to let her conduct her business without interference." The suggestion carried implicit warning. Wade was a bully, but he wasn't stupid. He understood that Jack Morrison was not someone to be challenged lightly. For a moment, the confrontation balanced on a knife's edge. Then Wade made a show of backing down, though his retreat was accompanied by face-saving bluster. "This isn't over," he declared, sweeping his gaze across the assembled crowd. "Mark my words, trusting these people will bring us nothing but grief." He stalked away with his men, leaving behind a crowd of uncertain townspeople. Sheriff Coleman visibly relaxed, grateful that violence had been averted. Jack started to turn away, his intervention complete, but found himself looking directly into Ayanna's eyes. She was studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if she were reading something written in his soul. "Thank you," she said simply, but her gaze never wavered. Jack touched his hat brim and walked away, but he could feel her watching him until he disappeared around a corner. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Jack spent time with his horse, checking equipment and trying to ignore the persistent feeling that his carefully maintained anonymity was slipping away. Word of his confrontation with Wade would spread quickly through the small community. Around midday, he returned to the Silver Dollar for lunch and found the saloon buzzing with conversation about the Apache delegation. Several townspeople had apparently sought Ayanna's help for various ailments, with reportedly remarkable results. "Saw it with my own eyes," Martha was telling a table of patrons. "Young Hendricks went to see her about that infected cut. She looked at it for maybe a minute, then placed her hands over the bandage and spoke some words in Apache. She paused dramatically, ensuring she had everyone's attention. When she removed the bandage, that wound was clean as a whistle. No infection, no inflammation. Already starting to knit together proper-like." The reactions around the table ranged from amazement to skepticism. Jack ordered a beer and listened to the various theories being proposed to explain what the witnesses had seen. "Could be some kind of herb," suggested one man. "Indians know plants we've never heard of. Or maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked to begin with," offered another. "Sometimes these things heal faster than expected." But Martha shook her head firmly. "I've seen enough infected wounds to know the difference. That girl has a gift, pure and simple." Jack was considering whether to order food when the saloon doors swung open and Ayanna entered. The conversations died immediately, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to amplify every small sound. She surveyed the room calmly, showing no sign of being disturbed by the stares. Her presence transformed the familiar space, making it feel somehow smaller and more significant. "I am looking for the man called Morrison," she said clearly. Every eye in the saloon turned toward Jack. He set down his beer and studied the young woman, trying to read her intentions. There was no hostility in her manner, but there was definite purpose. "That would be me," he said. She approached his table with the same serene confidence she had displayed earlier. Up close, he could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes and catch the faint scent of sage that seemed to surround her. "May I sit?" Jack gestured to the empty chair across from him. The rest of the saloon's patrons were making no effort to conceal their curiosity about this unusual encounter. Ayanna settled herself gracefully, folding her hands on the table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jack had the strange sensation that she was seeing things about him that he kept hidden even from himself. "You carry great pain," she said finally. The observation was delivered without drama or mystical pretense, simply a statement of fact. But it hit Jack like a physical blow, threatening the carefully maintained walls he had built around his emotions. "We all carry pain," he replied carefully. "Yes," she agreed. "But yours is different. You believe you are beyond forgiveness, beyond healing." Jack felt exposed, as if she had somehow looked directly into his memories of Denver. He reached for his beer, buying time to regain his composure. "You don't know anything about me." Ayanna smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. "Perhaps not, but I know something about men who help strangers without expecting reward." She was referring to his intervention that morning, his confrontation with Wade. Jack realized she had interpreted his actions as nobility rather than simple reflex. "That wasn't heroism," he said. "Just didn't like seeing a lady mistreated." "Even a savage lady?" The question was asked without bitterness, but it carried weight. Jack met her gaze directly. "I don't see you that way." "How do you see me?" The question was more complex than it appeared. Jack found himself genuinely considering his answer, trying to articulate something he hadn't fully realized himself. "As someone who's trying to build bridges instead of burning them down." Ayanna nodded slowly, as if his response confirmed something she had suspected. "My grandfather taught me that healing begins with seeing clearly. Not just the wound, but the whole person." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "You were not always what you are now, and you are not destined to remain what you have become." The words carried a weight that went beyond simple encouragement. Jack felt something shift inside him, a loosening of bonds he had thought permanent. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Ayanna said, rising from her chair, "sometimes the healer needs healing too." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "There is a place by the creek where the cottonwoods grow thick. If you find yourself unable to sleep tonight, you might walk there. Sometimes the night air helps with troublesome dreams." Then she was gone, leaving Jack staring at the empty doorway and wondering what had just happened. The saloon gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but he could feel speculative glances directed his way. He finished his beer and left, his mind churning with questions he couldn't answer. The young Apache woman had seen something in him, recognized something he thought he had successfully buried. The realization was both terrifying and strangely liberating. The afternoon passed slowly. Jack tried to focus on routine tasks, but his thoughts kept returning to his conversation with Ayanna. Her words had awakened something he had thought permanently dormant, a spark of hope he had believed extinguished in Denver. Evening brought its usual routines. Jack ate dinner at the boarding house, exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Patterson while avoiding deeper conversation. But when darkness fell and he lay down on his narrow bed, sleep refused to come. Images from Denver haunted him with renewed intensity. Thomas Grant's face frozen in death, his wife's keening cry, the little girl's eyes wide with incomprehension and loss. Around midnight, Jack gave up on sleep and dressed quietly. He made his way through the silent town toward the creek, following the path Ayanna had suggested. The night was cool and clear, with the moon bright enough to illuminate his way. He found the grove of cottonwoods easily, their leaves whispering in the gentle breeze that followed the water's course. The creek gurgled softly over smooth stones, a sound that seemed to wash away the harsh edges of his thoughts. Jack settled against the trunk of the largest tree and closed his eyes, letting the peaceful sounds surround him. For the first time in months, he felt something approaching calm. "I thought you might come." Jack's eyes snapped open, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. Ayanna sat on a fallen log perhaps 20 feet away, as motionless as a statue. He had no idea how long she had been there. "Nervous habit," he said, relaxing his grip on the weapon. "Understandable. Trust is difficult for someone who has seen what you have seen." She rose and approached slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. In the moonlight, she seemed almost ethereal, like a spirit conjured from the desert wind. "What do you want from me?" Jack asked. Ayanna settled beside him against the cottonwood, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. "Nothing you are not willing to give." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the creek's gentle murmur. Jack found himself relaxing despite his usual hypervigilance. There was something about her presence that quieted the constant tension he carried. "Tell me about Denver," she said softly. The request should have triggered his defenses, but instead Jack found himself considering it seriously. Something about the night, the place, the woman beside him made confession seem possible. "I killed a man," he said finally. "A good man who didn't deserve to die." Ayanna waited, offering no judgment or false comfort. Her patience invited deeper truth. He was protecting his family, his land. "I was just doing a job, following orders. But when he reached for his rifle, I reacted like I'd been trained. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late." The words came easier once started, like water flowing through a broken dam. Jack told her about the railroad company, the intimidation campaign, the moment when everything went wrong. He described the widow's grief, the daughter's terror, his own flight from the consequences of his actions. When he finished, Ayanna remained silent for several minutes. Jack wondered if he had disgusted her with his confession, revealed himself as irredeemably corrupt. "You have carried this burden alone," she said finally. "It's my burden to carry." "No," Ayanna said firmly. "Pain shared becomes lighter. Pain hidden becomes poison." She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting moonlight like dark mirrors. "The man you killed, Thomas Grant. Tell me about him." Jack was startled by her knowledge of the victim's name. He hadn't mentioned it in his confession. "How do you— Tell me about him," she repeated gently. Jack found himself describing Grant as he remembered him from their brief encounter. A weathered man in his 40s, calloused hands speaking of honest labor. Protective of his family, determined to hold on to the land he had worked to improve. A man not unlike Jack's own father had been before tuberculosis claimed him. "He sounds like a good man," Ayanna observed. "He was. That's what makes it worse." "Would he want you to spend the rest of your life torturing yourself for his death?" The question caught Jack off guard. He had never considered Grant's potential feelings about his killer's fate. "I don't know." "I think you do," Ayanna said. "Good men do not wish suffering on others, even those who have wronged them." She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he chose. When he remained still, her fingers touched his hand with feather-light pressure. The contact sent an electric shock through Jack's system. Not sexual attraction, though that was present, but something deeper and more profound. It was as if her touch connected him to something larger than his individual pain. "Forgiveness begins with forgiving yourself," she whispered. Jack stared at their joined hands, amazed by the simple intimacy of human contact. He had spent so long avoiding connection, building walls between himself and everyone around him. Now this young woman had breached those defenses with nothing more than gentleness and understanding. "I don't know how," he admitted. "Then let me show you." Ayana's other hand rose to rest against his cheek, her palm warm against his skin. Jack found himself leaning into the touch, starved for the comfort he had denied himself. "Close your eyes," she said softly. Jack hesitated, vulnerability warring with his need for control. But something in her voice, her presence, her absolute stillness, convinced him to trust. He closed his eyes and surrendered to whatever she intended. "See yourself as you were before Denver," Ayana whispered. "Remember who you were when you still believed in possibility." Images flooded Jack's mind, memories he had buried beneath layers of guilt and self-recrimination. His childhood on a small ranch in Texas, working beside his father to build something lasting. His mother's songs in the evening, his father's quiet pride in honest labor. "That person still exists," Ayana continued, her voice barely audible above the creek's murmur. "Wounded, but not destroyed. Lost, but not irretrievably." Jack felt something loosening in his chest, a knot of pain he had carried for so long it had become part of his identity. Tears leaked from beneath his closed eyelids, the first he had shed since leaving Denver. "Let it go," Ayana whispered. "Let the pain flow away like water." And somehow, impossibly, he did. The crushing weight of guilt that had defined his existence for months began to dissolve, replaced by something lighter and more sustaining. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of forgiveness. Not absolution, but hope. When Jack finally opened his eyes, he found Ayana watching him with an expression of profound compassion. Her own eyes were bright with unshed tears, as if she had somehow shared his pain and release. "How?" he whispered. She smiled, withdrawing her hand slowly. "Some wounds can only be healed by touch, by connection, by the reminder that we are not alone in our suffering." They sat together until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, sometimes talking quietly, sometimes simply sharing the peaceful silence. As the sun crested the mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose, Ayana rose to leave. "What happens now?" Jack asked. "Now you choose," she said simply. "You can return to carrying your burden alone, or you can begin the work of healing." She walked toward town, leaving Jack alone by the creek with his transformed world. The sun felt warmer on his face, the desert air cleaner in his lungs. For the first time in months, the future seemed to hold possibility rather than merely continuation. As he watched her figure disappear into the morning light, Jack touched the place on his cheek where her hand had rested. The untouchable man had been touched, and in that touch he had found the beginning of redemption.